Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. We want to talk about in Nigeria, a terrorist movement. I'm sorry, freedom fighters kidnapped a bunch of women and children, Boko Haram,
Mm.
that attacked civilians and attacked a school and then began kidnapping children. And it is reported that they kidnapped around 300 children and also hundreds of women in order to use them to press their demands and their goals and all of that. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that because recently we have learned that, for example, Hamas employed similar tactics. They went into the civilian population, massacred a bunch of people, and also raped and kidnapped a bunch of people. But that is all excusable because they're doing that as within the frame of fighting for freedom and fighting oppression and all of that.
Yeah,
And then, of course, things that you condemn become suddenly okay.
there won't be much retaliation against these guys because they have kind of free reign in Nigeria. But imagine where you had a strong government that wanted to do something about these terrorists, and they said, we're going to go get these guys. And like the entire world starts screaming, no, ceasefire, 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 man. They took all these girls. They took all these girls and they're over there in the woods raping them. But ceasefire, ceasefire. Sound like a bunch of idiots.
The hunt for nearly 300 school children abducted by gunmen goes on. But the governor of Kaduna State has told the BBC that at least 28 of those children have escaped their captors. The Nigerian army is leading the search for the children who were abducted from the northwest town of Kuriga in Kaduna State. Reports say students between the ages of 8 and 15 were taken.
Yeah, the military is currently running a rescue operation in Kaduna State, but also in the neighboring states of Katsina and Zamfara, which are all kidnapping hotspots here in northern Nigeria. The governor of the state, Ubasani, visited the school the day the kidnapping happened on Thursday. A number of them spoke to him. They said that they felt abandoned, that there wasn't enough security in the community, and they pleaded with him to help find their children. This has become a huge national and international story. The president here.
Can you imagine what kind of what a big story this would be if this was not happening in Nigeria, but rather somewhere else in the world, somewhere
Correct.
closer to the West, somewhere in the Middle East, and especially if the perpetrators were not Islamists, but people of a different background.
Yeah. If this were anyone except Muslims committing the crime, it would be a bigger story. If this were some non-Muslim group kidnapping Muslims, if this were the IDF going and capturing 300 school children, something like that, it'd be international news. There'd be protests around the world. But no, just doesn't matter to people. Nigeria is actually the place where the most Christians are killed each year for being Christian. In fact, it's for the past several years recently, there are more Christians killed in Nigeria for being Christian than in the entire rest of the world combined. And people hear almost nothing about it. I mean, Robert and I do a show called This Week in Jihad every week. You could actually do a show like that every single night, just covering what goes on in Africa with all the jihad going on in Africa. And it's amazing, by the way. It's amazing that people ignore this because, we tend to think that everything, what's going on in the world comes down to like the United States and Europe and so on, maybe China and a couple other places and so on. From the perspective of the spread of Islam, Nigeria's, possibly the most important spot on the entire world that everyone should be paying attention to. Is you got Muslims in the north, you got Christians in the south, and Muslims are trying relentlessly to push that line of division further and further south until it's all Islamic. What are they going to do after that? They're going to keep moving south. That's what they're going to shoot down through Africa. And so this is like a huge area. This stuff happens all the time, and the rest of the world ignores it because they're African and it's being done by Muslims. I don't see much in the way of a solution to this problem, except for like dividing it into North and South Nigeria, right? Making them separate states and saying the Christians in the South have their own state. Like I don't see another way, because they're going to keep pushing that line as long as it's their country and they have their leaders in charge.
It is pretty bad. So I have this this article from Open Doors, which tracks persecution around the world, persecution of Christians. It says that Christians in Nigeria, particularly in the Muslim majority North, continue to live under immense pressure and to be terrorized with devastating impunity by Islamic militants and armed bandits. More believers are killed for their faith in Nigeria each year than anywhere else in the world combined. The attacks are often brutal in nature and can involve destruction of properties, abductions for ransom, sexual violence, and death. Believers are stripped of their livelihoods and driven from their homes, leaving a trail of grief and trauma. Violence by Islamic extremist groups such as Fulani militants, Boko Haram, and ISWAP, Islamic State in West African province, increased during the presidency of Muhammad Buhari, putting Nigeria at the epicenter of targeted violence against the church. The government's failure to protect Christians and punish perpetrators has only strengthened the militants' influence. And so on.
Hey, you remember whatever it was, like a decade ago or so, when they took those Chibok girls, and like the world responded with a hashtag. Like you have these guys, they take hundreds of girls from a school, they take them out, they're converting some of them, they're raping them, they're getting them pregnant, and everyone in the rest of the world responds with a hashtag, bring back our girls, and that's all they ever did. By the way, everyone can go to Open Doors and sign up for their annual report, where they list the worst countries in the world and kind of rank them based on the amount of persecution in them and stuff. But it's a good way to stay updated on what's going on in the world.
Bola Ahmed Tinubu released a statement yesterday saying he'd do everything possible to return the children. Every single one had to be returned. He said anything less than that wouldn't be acceptable to him. And the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also released a statement late last night condemning the abductions and saying that the children should be released as soon as possible.
And Mayeni, what more is known about the 28 children who managed to escape?
Not very much, unfortunately. The governor spoke to the BBC yesterday. All he would say is that 28 children were released. He wouldn't give any more details. He said that's because he didn't want to jeopardize the on.
They escaped. That is quite impressive. So here's what persecution.org says. So terrorist groups kidnap about 687 people in northern Nigeria this week. On Sunday, March 3rd, gunmen from the Boko Haram terrorist group kidnapped at least 400 people from multiple IDP, internationally displaced persons camps in the northern state of Borno. On Thursday, March 7, unidentified armed herders attacked a school in Kuriga, Kaduna State, kidnapping at least 287 students and teachers. These horrific accounts come just 7 days before the 10th anniversary of the Chibok schoolgirl kidnapping, which sparked the international campaign Bring Back Our Girls. Boko Haram kidnapped 267 schoolgirls from Chibok in 2014, 98 of whom are still in custody, and so on. So this is ongoing. They are killing Christians, kidnapping Christians, and doing all kinds of horrible things. There were just a few years ago, 2 years ago or so, there was an instance of a woman being publicly lynched and killed and burned because of allegations that she offended Islam or something along those lines. For which, to talk about that, I had somebody, an activist, David Hundayan, on here to talk about that situation. So this is a very, very, very difficult place. The population of Nigeria is approximately 48.1% Christian and 50% Muslim. It was different. Christians were, I think, the majority. It changed. And unfortunately, there is the reality that Christians tend to be more peaceful in their interfaith relations wherever you go, and maybe more timid compared to the other part that is much more ready to take drastic actions. And here in this case with these Islamic terrorists, they are basically freely killing and massacring Christians with the aim of changing the society and turning this into a full-fledged Islamic country in the near future. And of course, people don't talk about it because it's Nigeria and because the Islamists are the perpetrators and not the others. If it were the other way around, this would probably get more attention. Like, for example, in Israel, right, when Islamists attack and kill and massacre and rape and kidnap people, and then their victims respond, then everyone talks about it because the victims are then switching roles. And when Muslims are the victims, then this is the center of the attention of the world. That's how it goes. This is how ridiculous and how pathetic things are. Friend of mine who started more than 100 churches in Africa sent photos of beheaded mothers killed by Muslims, mainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, I was at a conference in Ethiopia years ago, and there were Christians from several churches in different countries. There were people at the conference from a bunch of different African countries, and it was a lot of them were pastors, but it was also like security personnel, judges, police officers, all like people collaborating to understand what's going on in their countries as far as Islam goes. And I heard some of the sickest, most horrifying horror stories of all time about what goes on there. Almost no one wants to report it because they say there will be retaliation if it gets out. And I say, why don't you move somewhere else? And they would still go after the Christian community there just for me telling what goes on there. But it would be stuff like the Muslims come into an area and they capture the family and they slaughter the man in front of the woman and then rape the woman and then drain the man's blood and then hold her down and force her to drink it and forcibly convert her, and then she kills herself because she's so traumatized over everything that goes on. You say, hey, you should tell this story. And they go, no, because if you tell that story, then it's going to bring more negative attention on Christians for speaking out about that stuff. It's like, anyway, creepy stuff going on over there.
And as always, stay away from Islam. Or let's just let this guy say it. He sounds almost like this.
Stay away from Islam.